So I'm spending this week sat with 17 other, I was going to say people, they've become friends really, and we're exploring what it means to be a change maker and hearing each other's stories and sharing and learning, and we're weeping a bit and we laugh some. And I guess we are seeking to make meaning of our stories and our experiences and find ways in which we can tap deeper into the well of our own courage and creativity towards really just one thing, because it is the same in different words for all of us, I would say. And it is the same that Schumacher College itself is pledged to, I think, a just, beautiful, sustainable world, a peaceful world, a world that we could bequeath to our children and grandchildren and all other beings, feeling that we had in some way done our work well. And as we work along this trail, we touch, of course, on change makers who we know of because they're big names, and they are, many of them, deeply inspiring. But in my pathway of exploration around leadership and change making and people who have influence in the world, it becomes quite hard after a while to find such people amongst whom at some point or other some great and rather tragic flaw is not revealed. And then the sagging heart and the sort of sadness as we begin to realize that either this person is just human, or worse still, that somehow they are flawed in such a way that we're rather ashamed that we ever mentioned them or talked to them in a way that bestowed on them rights and a kind of held them up, I suppose. So I'd like to say something about what at some point, what I feel to be the real challenges that face us, whether our names are known or whether our names are not known, change makers and leaders of any kind that I've observed. But I thought, first of all, I'd just mention one, because we've discussed her in our sessions. And I, for one, can say that I do not know the truth of this situation. But I have named Aung San Suu Kyi now for many years as a woman whom though I have never met her personally, have leant back in admiration for the authoritative, dignified, graceful, and even beautiful manner in which she appeared to have brought herself to the world. Undoubtedly courageous in what she did in standing there against the generals in Myanmar. And then we have this information coming to us that at the very least it appears, and I say I want to stress that I do not know the truth of the situation, that she appears to have somehow sidestepped and colluded with those forces that see the terrible things that are happening to the Muslim population, the Rohingya over there. And no doubt over time we will become more informed, because it could be that there are forces at work here that we are not aware of. And so I, for one, feel very loath to move to a position, take an opinion, but I do know that it has unsettled me. And so I suppose now I won't be mentioning her name as somebody who I look up to as an embodiment of what it means to be a change maker with integrity, because I'm not as certain as I was that this is the case. I met quite some years ago now Mac Maharaj, whom some of you will know as a contemporary with Nelson Mandela. It was Mac Maharaj who transcribed Mandela's, Long Walk to Freedom when he was in prison. And together with a group of executives, we met with Mac Maharaj, and it was really wonderful to meet him. Such a figure. And we were there asking him questions about leadership. And one question we asked him was, in all your years of leadership, in a situation where lives could be lost through the decisions that you make or made, what is it that you have learnt most about leadership? What attribute do you believe is one of the most important that you would wish to possess as a leader, or indeed any of your people whom you command and whom you sort of lead and who issue the commands that sent troops of soldiers out in the battle against the apartheid regime, and in which many were captured, tortured, killed. And he surprised us all when he said self-doubt. As soon as he said self, and then he paused, and in everybody's mind it was going to be confidence. And he said self-doubt. He said, I've just had it with leaders who have no self-doubt, leaders who have no questions, leaders who are no longer curious, leaders who just know that because it's their idea or their thought that it must be right and it must be true, and we should just do that. I've come to believe, he said, that one of my senior deputies was probably responsible for the deaths of many of my people, for he had no self-doubt. I think we left that room deeply impressed with Mac Maharaj. He was eloquent. He was very heartfelt in the way he engaged with us. He was generous. He was humorous. There was a kindness about him. There were many lovely qualities. And then not that long afterwards, we learnt that it appears likely, some South Africans that I speak to say almost definitely, colluded in the appropriation of government funds of rather vast sums of money that went into his and his wife's bank account. I don't know how many of you remember when Tony Blair was on his way to becoming Prime Minister, and the wave of hope and good feeling that was rippling through everywhere. This is somebody different. It may not have been universally held. Perhaps some of the more perceptive of us might have seen something different, but I recall many people very excited of what Tony Blair might bring us. And we know what then resulted, which a sort of collapse of trust, really, a collapse for many of us. And I want to mention Mahatma Gandhi, and I feel now I'm treading on delicate ground. Now there is universally held a great deal to be admired and loved in Mahatma Gandhi. And he is another one who, of course, in my talks and things I have mentioned, and I've often told the story which I heard from Satish about this, how we need to be the change we wish to see in the world. And I've used that story on Speaking Out program and in all kinds of ways. But I remember reading At some point, inspired by him, I decided I would read more about Gandhi. And as I read, I became increasingly uncomfortable and a very, very sort of nasty, stuck feeling in my gut. Because what I was reading about was his attitude to women and sexuality. And I found this article that was written, and it says Gandhi despised his own sexual desires and despised sex in any context except for procreation. He preached that the failure to control carnal urges led to complaints, including constipation. He believed that sex was bad for the health of an individual and that sexual freedom would lead his people to fail. He sought to consign his nation to what Martin Luther called a hell of celibacy. He took his own vow of celibacy unilaterally without consulting his wife. Both Gandhi and his biographers claimed he viewed women as equal to men, pointing out his inclusion of women in India's independence struggle, celebrated non-violent protests as a feminine principle, neutralizing the masculine brutality of British rule. But his sexual hang-ups caused him to carry monstrously sexist views. His view of the female body was warped. An account by one biographer, a woman, says he believed menstruation was a manifestation of the distortion of a woman's soul by her sexuality. When he discovered a male youth harassing two of his female followers, Gandhi responded by personally cutting the girl's hair off to ensure the sinner's eye was sterilized. Gandhi boasted of an incident in his writings pushing the message to all Indians that women should carry responsibility for sexual attacks upon them. Such a legacy still lingers. Gandhi believed Indian women who were raped lost their value as human beings, arguing that fathers could be justified in killing daughters who'd been sexually assaulted for the sake of family and community honor. And it just goes on. And like all men who wage a doomed war with their own sexual desires, Gandhi's behavior around females would eventually become very, very odd. He took to sleeping with naked young women, including his own great niece, in order to test his commitment to celibacy. The habit caused shock and outrage among his supporters. God knows how his wife felt. It was that last bit that I remember reading from his own writing, because it was his writing, not a biographer, you see, that got me alerted to this rather peculiar and disconcerting attitudes. And it was as I researched more of his writings, I began to find out this to be true. And this, to me, there is a gift in it. I'm not going to talk about it tonight, but I have spoken at times about how the people who taught me most of everything that I now hold sacred and seek to my best of my ability to live by were ultimately the two main people, a man and a woman, the medicine teachers, the shamans who worked with me, I discovered to be deeply corrupted people. It's the blessing of that personal experience for me, after I had recovered from the shock and got over the whole thing, was the realization that it was the last time that I would ever hand my leadership somehow over to somebody else to do it for me, if you like. That I would place my hand on the tiller of my own ship and I would guide my ship, and I would of course seek to learn from others, but I would not attribute to them that which I should never give away, my own self-leadership, my own self-authority. And that in fact, dangerous as this of course can be, but knowing how flawed I am and knowing pretty well all my sort of peculiarities and challenges, felt that I would rather trust myself than I would the authority of others. I think we can be rather broken when icons whom we have looked up to, we discover that they are something less, and in some ways that there's something really quite repellent or truly unsettling about them, because it always guides us back to this place of saying, I need to take responsibility. I need to be that leader. And if I was speaking to a different audience, because I don't think this one would be perhaps right, but I might mention the name Winston Churchill, who, as we know, is universally I don't know what percent of our society would name him, probably, if they're naming a great leader, a great change maker. And there are indeed great things that he did. But it was when I married my Kenyan wife, Wandia, and realized how little I knew of Kenyan history, that I began to dig into that history. And as I did that, I began to realize that when I was a child of about 8, the Maumau Rebellion was taking place. And the British, this is after the Second World War, and all the lessons that could have been learnt from that war, were doing the most appalling things in Kenya, and doing it with a zeal that would compare with the worst of anything that was being done elsewhere, if not on the scale. I think there was a note from the governor of Kenya at that time, going back to Churchill, that said, if we are to sin, let us sin quietly. Meaning, don't let anybody know. So it wasn't unconscious, it was conscious. Now, when I married Wandia, I gained a son, and his name's Kevo. His surname is Kamau. In my research for the book, the manuscript of which I actually completed a year ago, but just haven't managed to shift it into a book yet, I was looking into this period of history in the Maumau and came across these recounts of tortures that had been inflicted on the Kikuyu tribe. Wandia is Kikuyu. And then I suddenly came across this recounting of the torture of a guy called Kamau, who carries the same surname as my son. And it was a truly horrific torturing, and the realization that I might have a son who was related to the Kamau in this thing. And Wandia's grandmother's teeth all smashed out. She died a couple of years ago from the rifle butt of a British soldier in the Maumau. It feels like I could go on, but the challenge of it, but the gift of it, I suppose, is what I'm trying to get to, and to unfold a little bit. So I would like then, if we were to say, well, these are people who achieved high positions and became well known, what I don't know is whether, in a sense, it was the power that they achieved and drew to themselves that eventually seduced them into actions that were less worthy than they should have been, or whether they were like that anyway. But what I do know is that many of the people that I have known who have held power over others and have achieved some level of recognition have indeed become seduced, those that I personally know. If I were to then, when Paul Hawken wrote his book, Blessed Unrest, and he spoke of all these countless organizations, hundreds of thousands of organizations that have sprung up around the world that are doing this amazing work, and like he describes it, I think the word movement as being inadequate to the phrase, to the reality of what's happening. And these are all organizations, but then I was thinking about individuals that I have known, and how I had two aunts as a child, and one was called Enid and the other Fran. And Enid and Fran were these women that we used to go down to and stay in their cottage in Herefordshire, and my younger brother and I would go down to the little stream across the meadows where we would make boats and sail them up and down this little river and things. And really, Enid and Fran were not of that much interest to me. I just, in a way perhaps of me, but perhaps other young children, I just sort of crashed into their house, bolted their food down and got out the door as fast as I could down to the stream. And I remember my mother telling me that Enid and Fran were people to be truly respected, because when in the 1950s the first exodus out of Tibet took place, Enid and Fran left their home and travelled to Tibet. And there they crossed into Tibet and with mountain guides began walking hundreds of children out of Tibet. And there's these photographs of these lines of children, and Enid and Fran as younger women leading these children through. I wasn't particularly impressed at the time, because I was only interested in the stream at the bottom of the meadows and bolting my food down as fast as I could. But later, I got a little bit more sensible about this and was just like slack-jawed at how two people living in rural Hertfordshire might find it in themselves, without anybody, to just get up and travel all the way to Tibet and begin to do this work with these little children. And it's those people. Even though, as I say, perhaps if we took Enid and Fran and put them under the microscope, we'd find out some details of who they were as humans that we'd rather not know. I don't know. But I feel at the moment that so many of us, you see, as we stand in the shadow of the Mandelas and the Gandhis and the others, sometimes, and I know this might be less true than it would be with some other audiences, but sometimes then somehow find it difficult to get out of our own chairs and commit ourselves to being the change makers that I think life invites us to be, and the times indeed invite us to be, because we could be just Enid and Fran sat here, couldn't we? It feels that the question that many of us ask, well, if we were to take as a different beginning point, in my work with people, you see, I often find that they have an extremely low opinion of themselves. Many people do. Well, it is masked often by position or title or the neighbourhood they live in or the cars they drive or some small acts of rather fragile bravado. But beneath it, with many people, is a person pretty unhappy with who they are, how they look, how they sound, what they've done, what they haven't done, all these different kinds of things. And therefore feel themselves on some level to be unworthy of taking leadership and being a change maker. And we'll ask the question, which is why some of my talks have been titled, Who me? Who me? Me? No, I'm not that kind of person. I wouldn't presume. And yet I feel that these times that we live in now, our earth and all things beautiful are begging us to step forward, to raise our hands and say, yes, me. At Embercombe, I'm fond of saying that the greatest danger we face at these times on this earth is not climate change, population, it's not our topsoil and the degradation of our environment. It's the passivity of ordinary good people who stand on the sidelines and sympathize and empathize and possibly choose a few different things at the shops or go to a different shop and buy organic cotton or whatever and do yoga and Forgive me, by the way, I probably do all these things. Well, no, I don't actually do yoga, but you know what I mean. And imagine that might be anywhere near enough. Embercombe has around it, and I suspect that Schumacher will have around it, various people that have come, been inspired, and then have moved a few hundred meters away and thought they'd stick around. And there's many good reasons why that might be the case, but I suspect there are at least one or two reasons why it might not be such a good thing. People coming on the journey at Embercombe who are serial workshop attendees, endlessly go to workshops and endlessly accumulate more, but never seems to be anything much coming out the other end. And I can't say the number of times that somebody's come to me at the end of the journey program and said, Mac, I know what I'm meant to do in this life. I said, oh, great, I get quite excited. I'm still naive and enthusiastic. I need to live here. No, you don't. You need to go somewhere nasty and unpleasant and bring healing. I don't actually say that because I live at, or I did actually live at Embercombe. But I do, that is the whole point. When I landed on Embercombe as the place that, with David Mann's money, I would buy and set up this social enterprise, one of the Native Americans said to me, they said, I've been thinking about what you're looking for, beauty in trees and south-facing hillside and a lake, a stream, all these beautiful things. And they are deeply inspiring, and they will help people connect with our Mother Earth. But you know, I hope you have considered the other option, which is go and find the filthiest, most stinking, revolting piece that you can find in Britain and plant a flag and there start building your social enterprise. Because it said, a little bit like, his name's gone out of my mind, it'll come. Oh, what's his name? Involved in the French Revolution, involved in the American War of Independence. Thomas Paine, yeah. Thomas Paine sat having a glass of whiskey with, I don't know, some of the huge names of that period of time. And one of them's supping his whiskey, leaning back, feet by the fire, and says, where there is peace, where there is beauty, where there is freedom, where there is all these things, there I wish to live. And Thomas Paine replying, where there is slavery, where there is brokenness, where there is filth, where there is whatever, that is where I wish to be. It was once in Totnes, I bumped into this guy Graham, maybe some of you will know him, homeless guy. I met him once when we met him through the School for Social Entrepreneurs, and he had been brought in. And Graham told us his story. He said that he'd left home when he was just a young child. It was the most terrifying story he told us about what home was like for him. Really, really brutal and disgusting, awful sort of thing no child should ever have to endure. And they have, many times, Graham's been offered a place to live, and he always leaves pretty much 24 hours later, at least when I last knew him. Because each time he's in one of those places, he remembers all the horrors that he had to endure as a child, and he only feels safe when he's outside. Now, Graham had this wonderful thought, which is not actually so original, because everybody here has had that same thought. He thought, how can I make a difference? In my case, as a homeless person, as a person who's traveling. And how can I make a difference? Because I need meaning in my life. I need the joy of fulfillment. I need the sense of knowing that my life meant something. And he hit on this idea since he walks all through the southwest and every town he visits. He thought, well, I could talk to people because I sell the big issue. I'll talk to people as I sell it, and I'll ask them, what does this town need? And people will reply, and I'm doing my field research, and I will build up this picture of what this town needs. And then I'll go to the shop behind my stand, and I say, if I raise money for this cause, could I ask the people that agree to give money to give the money to you? Because they wouldn't trust me, but they would perhaps trust you, and you would have some secure system within that which that money was given. And the shop agreed. And when I met with Graham, so far he'd raised something like £300,000 for various causes around the southwest, through visiting, talking to people, asking them to give money, selling a big issue. So it brought home to me, this thing of who me, as many of us don't feel so wealthy in one respect or another. I recall going to India, and on one particular day we were on an appointment to meet with these children who lived underneath the railway station in Mumbai, boys, a tribe of boys. And it had taken a long time to get agreement from the boys that they would meet with us. I was with this group of executives, again, searching the questions around inspiration and leadership. And it was believed that these boys were showing some leadership from a very unusual angle. And we arrived at this huge rail station in Mumbai, one of the stations where trains are coming in from the other side of India, great long distance trains. And on those trains are children, some unaccompanied children amongst loads of others, but sometimes as young as, say, 3 years old, traveling on the train on their own, because parents perhaps have put them aboard and told them to go and find their grandma lives in this place called Mumbai, and no sense that with no sense of the city, I guess the idea that they would find them. They're children who have just run away from home. It's just too horrible to endure. Endless stories, as we can imagine, all kinds of reasons that cause these children to board the trains. Now, ActionAid, who we were liaising with, was saying that these girl children, as young as you can imagine, last on average about 15 minutes before they're picked up by the sex trade. And then they just disappear. And ActionAid had done everything it could to try to locate these children when the train pulled into the stations, to try to locate them, identify them, protect them, and then find ways in which they could move to places where they'd be safe, or return them home if that was appropriate. But they'd failed, because the sex trade people are very fast, very sharp, very streetwise, and the ActionAid couldn't find the kids fast enough. Now, underneath this rail station in Mumbai, this tribe of feral boys live. And their own laws, their own leaders, their own everything, and they're pretty wild. Again, some of them incredibly young, like 5 years old, and probably the oldest around 15 or 16. And they're literally in the tunnels and all sorts of things under the station, like the cats or rats that live down there. And they're treated as such by the police and the railway authorities. So these boys are tormented by the police, beaten up, abused, chased, hounded down, all sorts of awful things dealt out to them. But someone in ActionAid came up with the idea, these kids are nothing if not streetwise. They know the laws of the jungle, and they are really fast and really sharp and very, very creative. So somebody took this idea and managed to get in touch with them and brokered the idea. They said, since you jump on, because the boys earn their living by jumping on the trains way before they stop, and they move through the train like a plague of locusts, gathering anything that they think they could either eat, drink, or sell. And they're off the train while it's still moving as well. And of course then the police chasing them and everything. And this is how they live. This is their work as they see it. And the Action Aid said, could you explain the situation to them about these young girls? Could you identify the young girls and get them off the train and into your safe custody before they get taken by the sex trade people? And the Action Aid person was telling us how this amazing thing that happened when they asked the boys to do this. It's like they straightened up, their shoulders went back, they looked, and for the first time in their lives they felt, wow, like that's a mission, that's a task, that's an undertaking, that they felt pride, that their skills were needed, their creativity, their amazing ability to do the job, the work that they do. And they very joyfully accepted the task. And the numbers of girls that were disappearing through the sex trade just crashed down. Those boys managed to reduce the numbers dramatically. And then Action Aid went to the police and brokered at least fairer treatment of these boys as well. And we had this wonderful circle. Somehow we need to find ways to invite people, because I think it's not the stories of all the difficult times that may be ahead of us, or the suffering that will be encountered as places experience more and more water shortage and drought and famine, war-torn areas. But somewhere I think there is a place for inspiration, for people to understand that actually through work, any kind of work of this kind, with some caveats on it, because it's not about martyrdom, it's about using the gifts and choosing where, but this might actually lead to the joyful, meaningful, fulfilled life that most of us look for. And just before I move on, I want to mention one other, a guy called N.K. Chowdhury. N.K. Chowdhury is, I'm not sure if he's still alive now. If he is, it must be, I don't know, well into his 80s. I met him in Rajasthan. N.K. Chowdhury, so he likes to be called N.K. N.K. has set up a social enterprise called Jaipur Rugs. When he began, he was moving through Rajasthan and other provinces looking at the extreme poverty of the people. Their skill was rug makers, but they were completely exploited by all the middlemen. So he started with 2 looms, 2 weaving looms, and 6 people, directly helping them take their rugs and selling them. Just checked, and now has 40,000 artisans working for his business. Isn't that amazing? 40,000 from 9, as he just set his mind to it. And I met him, and you can't stop the guy talking. He's so full of enthusiasm for what he's doing. He beams light and love and affection for these people. We visited the little families, and the pride that was shining from these families, that they have meaningful work, that they're making something that they know is highly valued around the world. And because of all of this, the other aim for NK was the education of the girl children, knowing, as we all know, in this way we're most likely to be able to produce a thread that will bring wealth into the families and education to the children. So the challenges that do face any of us now here in this room, whether we would call ourselves change makers or leaders, or any who might choose to step sufficiently into some kind of action that this title would apply, I believe, are either to do with seduction or depletion. And maybe there's more, but those are the two ones that I really came up with. So if we deal with depletion first, there are so many of the people that I meet with who are exhausted and exhausting themselves, are depleting themselves, arraigned against what feels like a sort of just an ocean, an ocean of grief, an ocean of need, an ocean of whatever it happens to be, of poverty, an ocean of just insurmountable odds arraigned against them, and who are flinging themselves at this time and time and time again, but quite clearly on a trajectory either slow or fast towards the point of just falling by the wayside. Another one is the failure, the collapse of hope. And I'm finding this one increasingly. And I find that I've always pondered this question, you see, a lot for me, about how people conceive of hope. Because many seem to conceive of hope as if hope is believing that there is going to be a happy outcome, that there is going to be a positive outcome, and that upon that they place their hope. But I can't help feeling, you see, this is a rather fragile foundation. What if the news and the information that keeps coming in were to indicate that we're far from actually anything improving, that it's getting worse? And what if it just gets worse and worse and worse? And what if the flow of displaced peoples upon the shores of Greece and Italy and Turkey and suddenly becomes just entire nations on the move, crossing borders, searching for water or a safe place or food? What if, we, as so many do, of course, huge love for our beautiful wild places and nature, and we watch it continue as it has done now. In my lifetime, 50%, WWF say, 50% of all the fauna and flora in Britain species gone. In my lifetime. And that wasn't from 100%. That was already massively depleted before that. And if we go back a few generations, massively depleted before that, and before that, and before that. How do we sustain hope if the evidence suggests, and I'm not saying that it does currently, that we will not see an outcome that would lead us to believe that our efforts have been rewarded with success? So I find that this is not a useful way for me to look at it. I choose to look at it in a different way. I say to myself, I know what I love. Since my childhood, I have learnt what I love. First was nature, the smell of earth, the texture of trees, the lime trees when they came into leaf, and the amazing green that is revealed when they do that. The smell of grass, of streams and rivers, and the pounding of surf on the beach. The mountains, sky, clouds, all these things spoke to me first. With them I felt entirely at home and knew myself to be family. Fortunately, it went so deep I never ever forgot. And that's what took me to the Native Americans and other indigenous people later in my life, when I was giving up with despair because I felt I'd been born at the wrong time and in the wrong place, and that everything that people valued and seemed to make sense to other people made no sense to me whatsoever. It was only later that I got to extend my love to people. As I said to our group, I found that rather more challenging. I trusted nature, I wasn't quite so sure about people. I choose to think of it like this. I know what I love. And would I do anything different if I believed that there was going to be, there would be no happy outcome? And I thought to myself, no, I find meaning by, in my own small and rather flawed manner, putting my efforts and my creativity and my gifts towards honoring that which I feel to be sacred. And I do that unconditionally, because it's sort of only all that I know what to do. So now when I speak to the corporate audiences that I speak to, which I tried to get out of, and it's only because of the Native Americans hectoring me that I took it up again. I didn't really want to. There's nothing corporate about me, I don't think, and I don't feel I really fit in too well. But when I speak with them, I always locate myself first before I start speaking, remembering and recalling why I'm there and whom and what I'm speaking on behalf of. And then all the fear evaporates out of me, because I know that sat in front of me are sons and daughters and lovers and uncles and aunts and grandparents and grandfathers, irrespective. That's what they are first. And that they too, deep down, love similar things. So I feel that it is an unconditional agreement. I would recommend this seeking to arrive at a place where it's an unconditional engagement on behalf of everything that you love. And that is why this question, what is it that you most deeply and profoundly love, is so important and cannot be worked through in 15 minutes of a quick chat with your neighbour, as it were, but is an ongoing inquiry as you find the strength and the willingness to undefend yourself, to remove your armour, to open your heart more, to become more willing to accept your vulnerability and the tears and the laughter and the childlike nature of you. And that in this way, we are able to find solid ground, I think. What is it that I most deeply and profoundly love? I hope very much is the question that I will carry forward forever. Another aspect, let me move to seduction. It's very clear to me that there are very few human beings who have the capacity and the means to withstand becoming successful without succumbing to hubris, without imagining themselves Icarus and then flying too close to the sun. Time and time and time again, it feels like that I have found people that have knowledge, have great academic intelligence, have great any kind of power. And time again, ultimately I've found arrogance, I've found intolerance, I've found, the sort of all kinds of things which I'm not sure that they always had. I recall working once for Ecclesiastical, the insurance side of that business. And I was invited in to meet with the board and have a chat with them, and they were saying, how can we build a culture that is unified, strong and integrated? And we were sat in their dining room, which was 5 floors up, and underneath there were 4 other dining rooms stacked on top of each other, all according to seniority. Amazing. So I said, well, it's not too difficult, I think. Collapse all the dining rooms into one, eat together, and chat. Here's my invoice. And they said, what a ridiculous idea. You're so naive and stupid, Pretty much they said that. Oh, I don't think it's so stupid. I think it's a really good idea. No, seriously, it would send an enormous signal through to your people. Just sit together, eat together, chat together. Tell your people, spread out. Wipe the tables. If you mention that one more time, Mac Macartney said to me after about the 4th meeting, we will dispense with your services. And this is a true story. I promise you it's true. One of them said, you don't understand, I've spent an entire career getting into this dining room. I have clambered up that greasy pole my entire life. I finally have a table, and you come along telling me I've got to go and swab it with the rest of the, heathens down on the bottom floor. No way. Okay. So I walked away. Something like 5 weeks later, an enormous piece of the ceiling fell out of the 5th dining room and landed on this massive mahogany table and smashed it to pieces. If anybody had been sat there then, there would have been deaths. What did they do? They shot down to the basement dining room and messed it with the rest of the people. Then they repaired the ceiling and went back up again. There is a price attached to becoming a change maker or a leader of any kind, because there are hierarchies, if you like, of success, if you wish to look at it that way. In money, in influence, in whatever. And I think the same challenge applies. I observe that it continuously takes place. And I know that I have to watch it in myself as much as ever I speak about it. In fact, one of the reasons I speak about it is to make it more public so that it's more difficult for me. But I've often thought, in my work now, speaking often, and if things go well, then there's some applause. And then the lights go down and people leave, and as I said to my group, but who is that person then who hails the cab, and how they interact with the person, with the cabbie? Who is that person, and how do they interact with the person that serves them food in the restaurant? Who is that person when no one is watching? There is something else around seduction which we call the wild dogs. This was introduced by those Native Americans who said when Jung developed his theory of subpersonalities, he learnt it from the indigenous people of the Americas. And they gave him the teaching of the wild dogs. Now, if you imagine right now that you are sat by a fire, and it's dark, and the fire sheds light around the fire, that is, as it were, your consciousness. And at the fringes, in the penumbra, when the light fades and moves into deep shadow, there are these snarling dogs. These are the wild dogs. These are the unintegrated, unresolved aspects of you who snarl and growl their dark malevolence on the fringes of the darkness of the fire. And most of us spend our whole time trying to just put more wood on the fire to keep the dogs at bay, because they're frightening. These are the parts of ourselves that we are frightened of, that slithering, cowardly aspect of ourselves, say, that we find repulsive. That slothful, indolent, kind of negative, apathetic part of us that we try to keep it down. That deeply arrogant, cruel, vindictive aspect of ourselves that we sort of keep. But it might be the little boy or the little girl who has never seen and never heard and is still crying in the shadows. He said most people push the wild dogs to the sides and try to live, but the thing that happens is as we get older, we become less able to do that. And you will begin to see in old people, as the wild dogs begin to encroach, begin to occupy themselves. So aspects of their personality that they've tried to suppress begin to sort of bubble up and burst out. The only way to deal with the wild dogs, they say, is to invite them into the light by the fire. And there something magical can happen, because you can you can engage them in conversation, you can engage them and you build relationship and you begin to draw them closer and closer. And as you do that, something extraordinary happens, because they can become integrated with you. And then, because they are not, their malevolence is only a dreamt of malevolence. It's a malevolence that exists while they're outside of your self-authority. But when they come in, they are usually immensely creative aspects of the personality that can be integrated and used, and that's all they want, is to come home. And yet, so often we find it so difficult to talk about the things of this kind, which is why in my work as a change maker, it feels one of the most important things that I should do is attempt to create spaces within which these stories can be told, and within which the wild dogs can be brought into the light, and at least the beginning process of befriending takes place. I want to also mention the twin trail, which I believe is also another indigenous teaching which relates very much to change makership and leadership. And the words spoken by them to me of, we would never trust any leader who was not walking the twin trail. The inner path of your own self-healing, self-growing, self-development, your spiritual coming home. And the outer path of having powerful effect in the world. So often they say we have people who do one or the other. You get the person who's only interested in the inner trail, who I've spoken of perhaps earlier, from whom there is never seemingly any outcome from all the investment, but is forever inward turned. And then you have the other one that is forever just doing stuff in the outside but has no inner journey. Now, I don't think anything gives a guarantee of a good result, but a genuinely applied both trails simultaneously and rigorously reduces perhaps the likelihood or the possibility of succumbing to the seductive factors that I've spoken about. Because we increasingly trying to become more conscious, we deliberately find and develop friendships where people will speak to us openly and honestly about what they see and how they feel. And they will apply their friendship in telling us when they believe that we've sort of crossed some kind of line or given them some rather worrying signal. The outer trail one are very often the people who those that dedicate themselves with very well-meaning hearts towards things in this world that will help, are ones who suffer from exhaustion and depletion. For they do not recognize. In fact, we are finding some of the big charities, the big NGOs out there, are some of the worst in refusing to invest anything in the inner trail for their people, even though their people are taking their heart and soul to the causes that they're addressing. But perhaps because of embarrassment, because they don't want to be seen to be spending their money on their people, but it feels to us really, really short-sighted. And lastly, I wanted to mention around spiritual realignment, because it seems to me that all of this ecological, environmental, social justice, this enormous movement that's taking place to seek to realign our world and redefine what we value and set us on a course for the world of our longing, is really and truthfully, it's a spiritual realignment. That's what's underneath all these things, I think. And I know many others do as well. And when this whole question of this appalling disconnection that's taken place between us and nature and ourselves and each other and all other beings, this loss that happened, that then creates in us the capacity to be so cruel and indifferent to the impacts that we have in this world. But while it's very easily seen of what happened, let's say, to the Aboriginal people in Australia, to the Native Americans and many other indigenous communities, what I think we have never been taught in our schools is what happened to us. Because what happened to us, it was so similar when the Roman occupation and what happened in Britain, because we were then, instead of Apache, Kiowa, Comanche, Lakota, we were Trinovantes, Atrebates, Dumnonii, Silures, Brigantes. We were tribal people. And as far as we can tell, we were just the same as the Native Americans. We were still pinching each other's horses and doing all that kind of stuff, but also we loved our Mother Earth. And we had a sense of connection with the land. And when Rome came to our shores, she brought with it this awful thing that for women to hold power was a perversion of natural law, and all kinds of other beliefs, not least to do with empire and colonialism and all those sort of things, which I think, and one historian I was reading was saying that the only place that was more traumatized than Britain through the Roman occupation and empire was Judea, was Palestine. And in their view, actually what set that whole story for the Jewish people, the Hebrews from that time. The second worst was here. And I've speculated, I've wondered whether the trauma inflicted on a people can be such that, like the abused child, they then go on to export that abuse around the world. I don't have the means to find out, but that's certainly what we did, along with other European nations. Well, what does a people do when so many of us feel so alienated and so betrayed by the religions upon whom in the past we have sought to find a sense of meaning and a storyline that somehow within which we can gather? And my own case, as you know, and you all have your own stories, ultimately sitting with that question of, I have this great spiritual longing in me. I want to come home to something that feels real for me. Who do I know loves the same things I love? The wildness and the mountains and the streams and the rivers and the lime trees and all these things. And at that time, in the 1970s, the only answer I knew to that was the Native Americans. And that's why I set off in that direction. There was nothing about South America at that time. There was nothing hardly about anything except North America. And I didn't even know, I'd never heard that there were medicine people still around teaching with any wisdom. It led me to do a whole number of things, but what I wanted just to speak about was it led me to the sun dance. And I have danced in the sun dance now 4 times, which usually when you pledge to do the sun dance, you pledge to do it 4 times. The first 3 times that I danced in the sun dance, the people holding that ceremony very unusually did not agree with the piercing. Some of you will be familiar in the Lakota sun dance. At a certain point in the dance, they make 2 incisions through your flesh here and there, and then a peg is pushed through from one incision through to the other. And then a thong is tied around that end and round that end, and the cord goes up to the tree. And a certain part during the dancers begin to hurl themselves backwards on the traces until ultimately they break free. Now, as I say, the first 3 times I did the sun dance, the people holding it did not agree with the piercing. And the ceremonies took place, and it was, it's 4 days no water, 4 days no food, dancing to the tree in 30, 31, 32, 34, whatever degrees of heat. And it's very tough. And the last time, it was a ceremony held by my dear friend's Lakota woman who I introduced to Schumacher College, Loretta, afraid of bear cook, and her husband Tom, and they hold the ceremony, and they do it in the Lakota way. And there were about 100 dancers, and I'd been invited to this dance. And this was now only about 3 years ago, I think. And this was my 4th. I wanted to do 4th, because my 4th, I pledged to do 4. I wasn't quite sure, because when I did my first dance, I think I was, I don't know what I would have been, maybe 40, and I'm now 68, so I wasn't quite sure how this was going to work, but I thought, well, I've done it 3 times, I can do it 4th. Yeah. And I got in the dance, and then I suddenly realized the piercing would be offered. And I realized this was a great turmoil for me, because as a young man, I would have leapt at the chance. I would absolutely have leapt at the chance. And I would have loved it. I would just have gloried in it. Yes, because you see, there's a big part of me, a younger part of me that would love to have just, I don't know, there's a part of me that would love to have gone into battle. Absolutely, no question about it. It's partly what my history was about. But then I'm 3 sun dances in, and I'm many, many ceremonies in, and I've grown older, and I've possibly grown a little bit wiser. But I was thinking, how do I feel about this piercing? I feel wonderful about it for the Lakota, because it's their ceremony. Everything, it's their entire thing, it's their ceremony. I'm not Lakota. For years now I have known that I would now stop doing those Native American ceremonies, because I want to discover my ceremonies on my land in my way. But I wanted to do this 4th dance. And also because I was honored by the invitation from Loretta. And I gradually realized that every single other dancer was going to the tree to have these cuts made and the pegs pushed through and the ties put on. And I knew that I couldn't do it, because I do not like it. I did not feel that it was right for me. But I knew everybody would notice. And because I'm a proud and egotistical human being, I didn't wish it to pass through anyone's mind that I might not be doing it because I was frightened to do it or something of that kind. So you imagine what I was going through, all these sort of thoughts. But I'm so glad that I didn't, you see. The funny thing is, about a year, 6 months later, I was in a workshop with Loretta here at the college, and she was talking about the Sundance way to the students. She said, Mac's done the Sundance. Mac, would you like to show your scars? I said, no, I can't do that. And she looked a bit confused, and she said, and then she realized we couldn't really get into a conversation about that. She carried on in the class. But later I said to her, I can't do that because I don't have any scars. Because I chose not to attach to be pierced and take this, because it isn't true for me, it isn't real for me. In fact, I've had it with all these bits of cutting bits of ourselves off and slicing bits here and slicing bits there. That is not the kind of spirituality I wish, and I believe is even good for me. I wish to pray by the river. I wish to take my little boy down to the stream and introduce him to the fierceness of nature as expressed in grass, as expressed in water, in mountains, in wonderful ways, but not in that way, because it is not true for me. So I am bringing this to you because I feel this is a big question for us who are searching some kind of real spiritual connection and have not yet found a home in any of the available things that have been made available to us. I find that when they said to me, look out into creation, open your eyes and witness what it is you have around you. Appreciate that you have been given a few short years and is drenched in the beauty of this earth. And that you do not need to believe in it, you can just exist and experience it. Why aren't you on your knees sobbing for the privilege of a life on earth? Our dreamers, those people who have been trained through their calling to try to go through the life-death door, to go through that door and peer behind the veil and see what is beyond death. Those of that number, many of whom lost their lives in the process but returned, say, there's a queue a mile long of spirits wishing to be born on earth. We don't understand this thing about escaping the wheel of incarnation. Our dreamers tell us that they're queuing up for the chance of a life to take form where they can experience this paradise. Value life. So that now becomes my guiding principle. I just wish to find and create the ceremonies that will connect me deeper and deeper and deeper with the joy of living, because that is the ground that I know will support me as I try to do my work best I can in the years that come. And lastly, using this term change makers, it was a deliberate thing. I just knew that if we put leaders, it would turn some people off. I understand it. It's a pretty toxic term. But I don't think we should ban it altogether, really. Any true leader is always happy to follow, to tuck in behind somebody else who's the right person for the right moment. They are not full up with of themselves. These are not people who have to be leaders. These are simply people who, for whatever reason, exert influence, and others tend to gather with them. And I personally believe that any person of that, you only have to be, which I say only, but any person of integrity who embodies that integrity in day-to-day small actions is a leader, because they're relatively rare on the ground. And people will gather to you, and you'll be embarrassed. And if they say that you're a leader, then you know. But that is what seems to be a leader, someone who is brave enough to live in alignment with their conscience and deep knowing of what a good life lived might look like. And we need this very much. Because there are countless good souls out there who just need somebody who might engage them in a conversation that would ignite and activate that person to realize that what is most beautiful on this earth is now endangered, and that their assistance and participation and contribution is needed. So whether you like it or not, I cannot imagine you would have come to a talk like this and not be one of these people. Greatest danger that we face is the passivity of ordinary, good, wonderful, beautiful people who choose to sit, stand at the sidelines, buy stuff a bit differently in different shops, have diets which are a bit different from most people, drive cars which might be a little different from most people, take holidays which are a little different from most people, but basically do pretty much nothing. Hope that doesn't sound too harsh. I say it a lot because I'm constantly trying to remind myself as well. Thank you very much.